The Delusional Witness. Chapter 1. Detective Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the crime scene, her eyes scanning the blood-spattered living room of the modest suburban home. The body of Martin Greaves lay crumpled on the floor, a kitchen knife protruding from his chest. Based on the initial assessment, he had been dead for approximately 12 hours before a neighbor noticed the front door ajar and called it in. As the forensics team worked methodically around her, Sarah's gaze was drawn to a slight figure huddled in the corner. A young woman with wild, unkempt hair rocked back and forth, muttering to herself. This was Abigail Foster, the victim's next-door neighbor and, as far as they knew, the only witness to the crime. Sarah approached cautiously, crouching down to meet Abigail's eyes. "Miss Foster? I'm Detective Chen. Can you tell me what happened here?" Abigail's head snapped up, her eyes wide and unfocused. "The dragons," she whispered urgently. "The dragons came and breathed fire. Martin tried to fight them off with his sword, but there were too many. They tore him apart with their claws." Sarah exchanged a glance with her partner, Detective Mike Ramirez, who had come to stand beside her. This was going to be more complicated than they'd anticipated. "Dragons?" Sarah prompted gently. Abigail nodded vigorously. "They came through the portal in the kitchen. Hundreds of them with scales like polished obsidian. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness. Martin was so brave, but even he couldn't stand against their fury." Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral. She'd been briefed that Abigail had a history of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia with severe delusions, but she hadn't expected anything quite this fantastical. "Miss Foster, did you see anyone else in the house last night? Anyone human?" Abigail's brow furrowed in concentration. "There was a shadow. A dark figure that moved like smoke. It whispered to the dragons, commanded them. But I couldn't see its face." Sarah nodded encouragingly. "That's helpful, thank you. Can you remember anything else about this figure? Any distinguishing features or sounds?" Abigail shook her head frantically. No, it was just smoke and whispers. But the dragons, they were so real. So terrifying." She began to rock again, her eyes glazing over. Sarah stood, gesturing for Mike to follow her a few steps away. "What do you think?" she asked in a low voice. Mike ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Honestly, I think we've got nothing. Dragons and smoke monsters aren't exactly going to hold up in court." Sarah frowned. "Maybe not, but there could be some truth buried in there. The dark figure could be our killer. And the dragons, maybe that's how her mind is processing the violence she witnessed." "Could be," Mike conceded. "But how do we separate fact from fiction? We can't exactly put out an APB on a fire-breathing lizard." Sarah's eyes narrowed in determination. "We start by corroborating what we can. Canvass the neighborhood, see if anyone heard or saw anything unusual last night. And we need to dig deeper into both Abigail's and Martin's backgrounds. There has to be a rational explanation for all of this." As they turned back to the crime scene, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to push her investigative skills to their limits. Somewhere beneath Abigail's fantastical account lay the truth, and Sarah was determined to uncover it, no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 2. The next morning, Sarah sat at her desk in the precinct, poring over the preliminary reports. The autopsy had confirmed that Martin Greaves died from multiple stab wounds, likely from the kitchen knife found at the scene. Time of death was estimated between 9 p.m. and midnight the previous night. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Neighborhood canvass complete. No one saw or heard anything unusual. One neighbor mentioned Abigail has a history of outbursts, often involving fantastical stories." She sighed, rubbing her temples. It wasn't much to go on, but it wasn't surprising either. Suburban neighborhoods were often eerily quiet, with residents tucked away in their homes, oblivious to the dramas unfolding around them. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Dr. Emily Winters, the department's forensic psychologist, entered with a thick file tucked under her arm. "You wanted to see me about the Foster case?" Sarah nodded, gesturing for Emily to take a seat. "What can you tell me about Abigail's condition? Is there any chance we can get a coherent statement from her?" Emily's expression was sympathetic but doubtful. I've reviewed her medical history. Abigail has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia since her late teens. She experiences vivid hallucinations and delusions, often with fantastical or mythological themes. Dragons are a recurring motif in her episodes. So the dragons she claims to have seen kill Martin Greaves, they're not new? Emily shook her head. No, they've been a part of her delusions for years. In Abigail's mind, they're very real and very dangerous. She's been hospitalized several times after claiming dragons were attacking her or others. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Is there any way to, I don't know, break through the delusion? To get at the truth of what she might have actually seen? It's not that simple, Emily explained. Abigail's delusions aren't a wall we can simply knock down to reveal reality. They're her reality. Challenging them directly can cause severe distress and make her even less likely to communicate clearly. So what do you suggest? Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Emily thought for a moment. We need to approach this obliquely. Instead of trying to disprove the dragons, we should work within the framework of her delusion. Ask about details that might correlate to real-world events. The dark figure she mentioned, for instance, could be a representation of the actual killer. Sarah nodded slowly. Okay, that makes sense. But how do we know what's a genuine recollection and what's pure fantasy? We don't, not with absolute certainty, Emily admitted. But if we can establish patterns or consistencies in her account, we might be able to piece together what really happened. It's going to take time and patience, though. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text from Mike. Background check on Greaves complete. Guy was squeaky clean on paper. Worked as an accountant, no criminal record, no known enemies. Divorced 3 years ago, ex-wife lives out of state. She showed the message to Emily. Doesn't give us much to work with. No obvious suspects or motives. Emily raised an eyebrow. Maybe that's something else to explore with Abigail. In her delusion, why would dragons attack Martin? Even in a fantasy world, there's usually a reason for conflict. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a direction to pursue. Thanks, Emily. I think I'll pay Abigail another visit. Maybe if we can understand the why in her version of events, it'll lead us to the real motive. As Emily left, Sarah gathered her notes and jacket. She had a feeling this case was going to require her to think far outside the box of traditional police work. But if that's what it took to find justice for Martin Greaves, she was ready for the challenge. Chapter 3. Sarah pulled up to Abigail Foster's small, slightly run-down house. The yard was overgrown, with wildflowers peeking through the tall grass. It had a whimsical, almost fairy tale-like quality that seemed fitting given Abigail's fantastical delusions. As she approached the front door, Sarah noticed intricate drawings taped to the windows. Dragons in flight, breathing fire and battling knights in shining armor. The artwork was surprisingly skilled, full of detail and movement. Sarah made a mental note to ask about them. She knocked gently. After a moment, she heard shuffling inside, and the door creaked open. Abigail peered out, her eyes darting nervously from side to side before settling on Sarah. Miss Foster? I'm Detective Chen. We met yesterday. May I come in? I'd like to talk to you some more about what happened to Martin. Abigail hesitated, then nodded, opening the door wider. You have to be quiet, she whispered. The dragons are sleeping, but they might wake if we disturb them. Sarah stepped inside, taking in the cluttered but clean interior. More drawings covered the walls, interspersed with strings of crystals and dream catchers. Of course, she said softly. We wouldn't want to wake them. Is there somewhere we can sit and talk? Abigail led her to a small kitchen table, its surface cleared except for a steaming mug of tea. Would you like some? She offered. It keeps the dragon dreams away. No, thank you, Sarah declined politely. She sat across from Abigail, pulling out her notebook. I wanted to ask you more about what happened to Martin. You mentioned dragons coming through a portal in his kitchen. Can you tell me why they attacked him? Abigail's eyes grew wide. Martin was a dragon keeper, she whispered urgently. He protected our world from theirs. But something went wrong. The portal. It wouldn't close. Too many came through. Sarah leaned in. intrigued by this new development in Abigail's narrative. A dragon keeper? What does that mean? What did Martin do to protect us? He had a special key, Abigail explained, her hands moving animatedly. It could lock the portal, keep the dragons in their world. But someone stole it. The shadow person, the one who controls the dragons. They took the key and opened the portal wide. Sarah's mind raced, trying to translate Abigail's fantasy into potential real-world parallels. Could the key represent something Martin possessed? Something valuable enough to kill for? This key, Sarah prompted gently. Can you describe it to me? What did it look like? Abigail's brow furrowed in concentration. It was small, shiny, like a star had fallen from the sky and hardened. Martin always wore it around his neck, hidden under his shirt. A necklace, Sarah realized. Or perhaps a pendant. Something Martin kept close and concealed. And the shadow person took it from him? Abigail nodded vigorously. Yes, yes. They ripped it from his neck as the dragons held him down. And then... She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Then the dragons tore him apart. There was so much blood, so much screaming. I wanted to help, but I was frozen. I couldn't move. Sarah reached out, placing a comforting hand on Abigail's arm. You're safe now, she assured her. Can you tell me anything else about the shadow person? Did they say anything? Did you notice any smells or sounds associated with them? Abigail closed her eyes, her face scrunched in effort. They smelled like flowers, but not nice flowers. Sharp, angry flowers. And their voice. It was soft but cold. Like icicles breaking. Sarah jotted down these details, her mind already working to interpret them. A perfume, perhaps? And the voice, possibly disguised, but distinctly memorable to Abigail. Thank you, Abigail. You're being very helpful, Sarah said warmly. I have one more question, if that's okay. The drawings on your windows and walls? Did you make those? Abigail nodded, a hint of pride crossing her face. Yes. I have to draw them. It's the only way to keep the memories from overwhelming me. When I put them on paper, they're not trapped in my head anymore. Sarah stood, walking to examine one of the drawings more closely. It depicted a fearsome dragon breathing fire at a man wielding a sword. The man's face was clear enough to recognize. It was Martin Greaves. These are very good, Sarah commented. You've captured a lot of detail. How long have you been drawing Martin fighting dragons? Abigail thought for a moment. Since he moved in next door. 3 years ago, I think. That's when I first saw him use the key to close the portal. He became the protector of our street. Sarah's mind whirled with this new information. Abigail had incorporated Martin into her delusions almost immediately after he became her neighbor. Was there a reason for this? Had something happened when he moved in that triggered this specific fantasy? As she prepared to leave, Sarah noticed a calendar hanging on Abigail's refrigerator. Certain dates were circled in red, with the word danger scrawled across them. The date of Martin's murder was one of them. Abigail, Sarah asked carefully, what do these red circles mean? Why is yesterday marked as a danger day? Abigail's eyes darted to the calendar, then back to Sarah. Those are the days when the portal is weakest. When it's easiest for the dragons to break through. Martin had to be extra vigilant on those days. Sarah snapped a quick photo of the calendar with her phone. It might be nothing, but in a case like this, every detail could potentially be significant. As she left Abigail's house, Sarah felt a mix of frustration and intrigue. On the surface, Abigail's account was pure fantasy. But underneath the dragons and magic, there were threads that felt real. A stolen necklace. A distinctive perfume. A voice like breaking icicles. And a pattern of danger days that coincided with the actual murder. Sarah slid into her car, already dialing Mike's number. They had a lot of work to do, translating Abigail's delusions into workable leads. But for the first time since taking on this bizarre case, Sarah felt like they might actually have a chance at solving it. Chapter 4. Back at the precinct, Sarah and Mike huddled around the evidence board, trying to make sense of the information they'd gathered. Photos of the crime scene were interspersed with Sarah's notes from her conversation with Abigail, as well as the image of the calendar with its ominous red circles. Okay, let's break this down, Mike said, tapping a marker against his palm. What do we actually know separate from Abigail's unique perspective? Sarah consulted her notebook. Martin Greaves, 42, divorced accountant. No criminal record, no known enemies. Stabbed multiple times in his home between 9 p.m. and midnight 2 nights ago. No signs of forced entry, suggesting he knew his killer or let them in willingly. Mike nodded, jotting these points on the board. And from the neighbor canvas, no one heard or saw anything unusual that night. It's like the killer was a ghost. Or a shadow that moved like smoke, Sarah murmured, recalling Abigail's words. Mike raised an eyebrow. You're not buying into the dragon story, are you? Sarah shook her head. No, but I think there are nuggets of truth in what Abigail's telling us. We just need to decode it. She pointed to her notes. Abigail mentioned a key or necklace that Martin always wore. Something small and valuable that the killer took. We should check with his ex-wife, see if she knows anything about that. Good idea, Mike agreed. What about this shadow person Abigail described? Any thoughts on who that might represent in reality? Sarah frowned in concentration. She said they smelled like sharp, angry flowers and had a voice like icicles breaking. It's not much to go on, but it's distinctive. Maybe someone Martin knew who wears a strong, unusual perfume. Mike added these details to the board. And the calendar? Those danger days Abigail marked. That's where it gets interesting, Sarah said, pulling up the photo on her phone. I cross-referenced those dates with Martin's work in bank records. On every single one of those danger days over the past year, Martin made a large cash withdrawal from his account. Always $5,000, always on those specific dates. Mike whistled low. Now that's something concrete. Any idea where that money was going? Sarah shook her head. Not yet. His financial records don't show any unusual deposits or expenditures that would account for it. It's like the money just disappeared. Could be drugs, Mike suggested. Chapter 5. Sarah considered Mike's suggestion. It's possible, she admitted. But if Martin was involved in something shady, why did it only happen on those specific dates? There's a pattern there, and we need to figure out what it means. Mike nodded, tapping the board thoughtfully. We should also look into his work. Maybe there's something there that could explain the withdrawals. An accounting job might give him access to funds or financial information that could be valuable. Sarah agreed. I'll reach out to his employer and see if they can provide any insight. In the meantime, let's track down his ex-wife. She might know something about that necklace or key Abigail mentioned. As they divided up their tasks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something significant. Abigail's delusions, while fantastical, seemed to be pointing them toward a hidden truth. They just needed to piece it all together. Later that day, Sarah found herself sitting across from Martin's ex-wife, Laura Greaves, in a quiet coffee shop. Laura was a petite woman in her late 30s, with tired eyes and an air of resignation. Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Greaves, Sarah began. I know this must be difficult for you. Laura nodded, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. It's surreal. Martin and I hadn't spoken much since the divorce, but I never imagined something like this would happen. Sarah offered a sympathetic smile. I understand. I wanted to ask you a few questions about Martin, if that's okay. Did he ever mention anything about a necklace or pendant he wore? Something he kept hidden? Laura's brow furrowed in thought. A necklace? No, I don't think so. Martin wasn't much for jewelry. He wore a watch, but that was about it. Sarah made a note of this. What about any unusual financial activity? Large cash withdrawals, for instance. Laura shook her head. Not that I know of. Martin was always careful with money, even after the divorce. He paid alimony on time, never missed a payment. Sarah hesitated, then decided to broach the subject of Abigail's delusions. There's something else. Our only witness, a neighbor named Abigail Foster, has a history of mental illness. She's been telling us about dragons and portals. I know it sounds strange, but she mentioned Martin being a dragon keeper and having a special key. Does any of that mean anything to you? Laura's eyes widened in surprise. Abigail? I remember her. She was always a bit eccentric. Martin mentioned her a few times, said she was convinced he was some kind of hero in her fantasy world. He thought it was harmless. Did he ever express concern about her? Or mention any interactions they had? Laura considered this. Not really. He said she was mostly quiet, kept to herself. But he did say she had a vivid imagination. He even joked about being her knight in shining armor once. Sarah filed this away. It seemed Martin had been aware of Abigail's delusions, but hadn't considered them a threat. Thank you, Ms. Greaves. You've been very helpful. As she left the coffee shop, Sarah's mind was buzzing with possibilities. Martin's connection to Abigail, however tenuous, might have played a role in his murder. But how did the financial withdrawals fit into all of this? Back at the precinct, Mike was waiting with an update. I spoke with Martin's employer. They were shocked to hear about his death. Said he was a model employee. Never missed a day of work. But here's the kicker. They had no record of him taking any vacation or sick days on those danger days when he made the withdrawals. Sarah's eyes widened. So he was still going to work even on those days? Exactly, Mike confirmed. And get this, they said he was working on a big project for a high-profile client. Something about tax shelters and offshore accounts. They couldn't give me details, but it sounds like it could be significant. Sarah's mind raced. What if those danger days were somehow connected to this project? Maybe Martin was involved in something illegal, and someone found out. Mike nodded. It's possible. We should look into this client, see if there's any connection to the murder. As they continued to piece together the puzzle, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on the truth. Abigail's delusions, Martin's secretive behavior, and the mysterious financial activity. It all pointed to a deeper conspiracy. They just needed to find the missing link. Chapter 6. The next morning, Sarah and Mike sat in the conference room, reviewing the information they'd gathered so far. The evidence board was filled with photos, notes, and timelines, but the pieces still weren't fitting together. We need to find out more about this client Martin was working for, Sarah said, tapping her pen against the table. If they were involved in something illegal, it could explain a lot. Mike nodded, flipping through his notes. I reached out to a contact in the financial crimes unit. They're looking into any offshore accounts or suspicious activity linked to Martin's firm. It might take some time, but hopefully they'll find something. Sarah glanced at the clock. In the meantime, I'm going to pay Abigail another visit. There might be more details in her story that we can use. As she drove to Abigail's house, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous this case seemed. If Martin had been involved in something illicit, there was no telling how far the conspiracy might reach. Abigail greeted her at the door with a wary smile. Detective Chen. The dragons are restless today. I can feel it. Sarah nodded, stepping inside. I understand. I wanted to ask you a few more questions about Martin. You said he was a dragon keeper and had a special key. Can you tell me more about that? Abigail's eyes brightened with excitement. Yes. Martin was the bravest of them all. He had the key to lock the portal to keep the dragons from crossing over. But the shadow person stole it, and now the portal is open. Sarah leaned forward, trying to draw out more details. This shadow person. Did they ever speak to Martin? Did you hear anything they said? Abigail frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. They whispered to him, but I couldn't hear the words. It was like the wind through the trees. But I saw them take the key. Sarah's heart raced. If Abigail had witnessed the murder, even through the lens of her delusions, there might be crucial details she hadn't yet shared. Can you describe the shadow person again? Anything you remember could be helpful. Abigail closed her eyes, her face scrunched in effort. They were tall, taller than Martin. And they wore a cloak like a shroud of darkness. Their eyes glowed like embers. Sarah jotted down these details, her mind racing with possibilities. A tall figure cloaked in darkness. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you, Abigail. You've been very helpful. As she left, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Abigail's delusions, while fantastical, seemed to be pointing them toward the truth. They just needed to decipher the clues hidden within her mind. Chapter 7. Back at the precinct, Sarah and Mike gathered in the conference room to review the latest developments. The evidence board was now filled with photos, notes, and timelines, but the pieces still weren't fitting together. "We need to find out more about this client Martin was working for," Sarah said, tapping her pen against the table. "If they were involved in something illegal, it could explain a lot." Mike nodded, flipping through his notes. "I reached out to a contact in the financial crimes unit. They're looking into any offshore accounts or suspicious activity linked to Martin's firm. It might take some time, but hopefully they'll find something." Sarah glanced at the clock. "In the meantime, I'm going to pay Abigail another visit. There might be more details in her story that we can use." As she drove to Abigail's house, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous this case seemed. If Martin had been involved in something illicit, there was no telling how far the conspiracy might reach. Abigail greeted her at the door with a wary smile. "Detective Chen, the dragons are restless today. I can feel it." Sarah nodded, stepping inside. "I understand. I wanted to ask you a few more questions about Martin. You said he was a dragon keeper and had a special key. Can you tell me more about that?" Abigail's eyes brightened with excitement. Yes. Martin was the bravest of them all. He had the key to lock the portal to keep the dragons from crossing over. But the shadow person stole it, and now the portal is open." Sarah leaned forward, trying to draw out more details. "This shadow person. Did they ever speak to Martin? Did you hear anything they said?" Abigail frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. "They whispered to him, but I couldn't hear the words. It was like the wind through the trees. But I saw them take the key." Sarah's heart raced. If Abigail had witnessed the murder, even through the lens of her delusions, there might be crucial details she hadn't yet shared. "Can you describe the shadow person again? Anything you remember could be helpful." Abigail closed her eyes, her face scrunched in effort. "They were tall, taller than Martin. And they wore a cloak like a shroud of darkness. Their eyes glowed like embers." Sarah jotted down these details, her mind racing with possibilities. A tall figure cloaked in darkness. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you, Abigail. You've been very helpful." As she left, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Abigail's delusions, while fantastical, seemed to be pointing them toward the truth. They just needed to decipher the clues hidden within her mind. I hope you enjoy the continuation of the story. If you would like me to continue, please let me know. Chapter 8. Back at the precinct, Sarah shared her latest findings with Mike. They pored over the new information, trying to connect it to what they already knew. "A tall figure in a dark cloak," Mike mused. "Could be anyone, really. But the glowing eyes. That's distinctive. Maybe some kind of reflective glasses or goggles." Sarah nodded. "It's possible. Abigail's mind might be interpreting something real in a fantastical way. We should look into any recent burglaries or break-ins where the perpetrator wore night vision goggles or something similar." As they discussed the case, Sarah's phone rang. It was her contact from the financial crimes unit. "Detective Chen? We've got something interesting on Martin Greaves. Those large cash withdrawals you asked about? We traced them to a series of deposits into an offshore account registered to a shell company. The company's tied to a big international conglomerate, Draco Industries." Sarah's eyes widened. "Draco? As in dragon? Yeah, weird coincidence, right? Anyway, Draco Industries is clean on paper, but there have been whispers about some shady dealings. Nothing concrete enough for an investigation, but it's raised a few eyebrows." Sarah thanked her contact and relayed the information to Mike. "This can't be a coincidence," she said. "Abigail's dragon delusions, Martin's secret payments, and now a company named Draco? There has to be a connection." Mike nodded, his expression grim. "And if Draco Industries is as powerful as they sound, we could be dealing with some dangerous people. We need to tread carefully." Sarah agreed. "Let's dig deeper into Draco. See if we can find any local connections or employees that might fit our killer's description." As they delved into research on Draco Industries, a knock on the door interrupted them. It was Officer Jenkins, looking flustered. "Detectives, you need to come quickly. There's been another murder." Chapter 9. Sarah and Mike rushed to the scene, their minds racing with possibilities. As they pulled up to the modest apartment building, Sarah's heart sank. She recognized the address. It was where Laura Greaves, Martin's ex-wife, lived. Inside, they found a scene eerily similar to Martin's murder. Laura lay on the floor of her living room, multiple stab wounds to her chest. The murder weapon, another kitchen knife, had been left at the scene. As the forensics team worked, Sarah noticed something odd. On the wall above Laura's body, scrawled in what looked like blood, was a crude drawing of a dragon. "This has to be connected to Martin's murder," Sarah said, her voice low. "But why target his ex-wife? And why leave this drawing?" Mike shook his head, bewildered. "It's like the killer is taunting us, playing into Abigail's delusions. But how would they even know about that?" A thought struck Sarah. Unless Abigail isn't as disconnected from reality as we thought. What if she's more involved in this than we realized? Before Mike could respond, an officer approached them. "Detectives, we found something you should see." He led them to Laura's bedroom, where a laptop sat open on the desk. On the screen was an email draft, never sent. To Detective Sarah Chen. "I remember something about Martin's necklace. It wasn't jewelry, it was a USB drive. He called it his key, and said it contained information that could bring down some very powerful people. I think he was scared. I should have told you sooner." "I'm sorry." Sarah and Mike exchanged grim looks. "This changed everything." "We need to get back to Abigail," Sarah said urgently. "If she knows more than she's letting on, she could be in danger too." As they raced back to Abigail's house, Sarah's mind whirled. The key wasn't a fantasy, it was real. And it contained information valuable enough to kill for. But who was behind it all? And how deep did this conspiracy go? Chapter 10. Sarah's car screeched to a halt outside Abigail's house. The front door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. Sarah's heart raced as she and Mike drew their weapons, approaching cautiously. "Abigail," Sarah called out as they entered. "It's Detective Chen. Are you here?" The house was eerily quiet. They moved through the cluttered rooms, finding no sign of struggle but no sign of Abigail either. In the kitchen, Sarah noticed something odd. All of Abigail's drawings had been torn from the walls, leaving behind only scraps of paper and bits of tape. "Mike," Sarah said softly, "look at this." On the refrigerator, held in place by a dragon-shaped magnet, was a note. "The shadow people have taken me to face the Dragon King. Only the true keeper of the key can save us now." Mike frowned. Is this more of her delusion or some kind of code? Sarah shook her head, frustrated. "I don't know, but we need to figure it out fast. Abigail's life could be in danger." As they searched the house for any additional clues, Sarah's phone rang. It was the lab. "Detective Chen, we've got something interesting from the Greaves crime scene. We found traces of a rare flower on the victim's clothing, a species of orchid called Dracula vampira." Sarah's eyes widened. "Dracula orchid? That can't be a coincidence." "There's more," the lab tech continued. "This particular species is extremely hard to cultivate. We only found one local supplier, a high-end florist that caters exclusively to corporate clients. Their biggest account? Draco Industries." Sarah thanked the tech and relayed the information to Mike. "This is it," she said. "The sharp, angry flowers Abigail mentioned. We need to pay a visit to Draco Industries." As they left Abigail's house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Somewhere in this city, Abigail was being held by dangerous people, and the key to unraveling this entire conspiracy was still out there. They had to move fast if they wanted to prevent more bloodshed and uncover the truth hidden behind Abigail's fantastical delusions. Chapter 11. The sleek, modern headquarters of Draco Industries loomed before them, its glass facade reflecting the late afternoon sun. Sarah and Mike approached the reception desk, flashing their badges. "We need to speak with someone in charge," Sarah said firmly. "It's regarding an ongoing investigation." The receptionist, a young woman with a polite but guarded expression, eyed them warily. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm afraid our executives are very busy and dash." "This is a matter of life and death," Mike interrupted. "We don't have time for bureaucracy." Before the receptionist could respond, a tall, Imposing man in an expensive suit approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of steel. Sarah turned to face him. "And you are?" "Victor Drake, CEO of Draco Industries," he replied, extending a hand. "How can I help you, detectives?" Sarah shook his hand, noting his firm grip and the faint scent of an expensive cologne, one with distinct floral notes. "Mr. Drake, we're investigating a double homicide that we believe may be connected to your company. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Drake's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something: surprise? Concern? In his eyes. "Of course. Why don't we speak in my office?" As they followed Drake to the elevator, Sarah exchanged a glance with Mike. They both felt it, they were getting close to something big. Drake's office was a testament to power and wealth, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. As they sat across from him, Sarah noticed a small terrarium on his desk, housing a delicate, dark purple orchid. "Dracula vampira," she said, nodding towards the plant. "A rare and beautiful species." Drake smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You have a keen eye, detective." "Yes, I'm something of an orchid enthusiast. Now, what can you tell me about these homicides?" Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Drake, are you familiar with Martin Greaves?" Drake's expression remained impassive. "The name doesn't ring a bell. Should it?" "He was an accountant who we believe was working on a project for your company," Mike interjected. "He was murdered 2 days ago, and his ex-wife was killed yesterday." Drake shook his head, a look of concern crossing his face. "That's terrible, but I'm afraid I don't see how it connects to Draco Industries. We work with many accounting firms." Sarah pressed on. "Mr. Greaves was making large cash withdrawals on specific dates over the past year. Those same dates he was working on a project involving offshore accounts and tax shelters. Does that sound like something your company might be involved in?" Drake's smile tightened. "Detective Draco Industries is a multi-billion-dollar corporation with interests around the globe. Our financial dealings are complex but entirely legal. If Mr. Greaves was involved in anything illegal, it was certainly without our knowledge or consent." As Sarah opened her mouth to ask another question, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the precinct. "Abigail Foster spotted entering abandoned warehouse at 1255 Harbor Street. Backup en route." Sarah stood abruptly. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Drake. We'll be in touch if we have any further questions." As they hurried out of the office, Mike whispered, "Did you buy any of that?" Sarah shook her head. "Not a word. But right now, we need to focus on finding Abigail. She's our key to unraveling all of this." As they raced towards the warehouse, Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. The connection between Draco Industries, Martin Greaves, and Abigail's delusions was becoming clearer, but the full picture was still frustratingly out of reach. Whatever was hidden in that warehouse, Sarah had a feeling it would blow this case wide open. If they could get to Abigail in time. Chapter 12. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them, its rusted metal exterior a stark contrast to the gleaming offices of Draco Industries. Sarah and Mike approached cautiously, guns drawn, as backup units secured the perimeter. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "Abigail's mental state is fragile. We need to be careful how we approach this." Mike nodded grimly. "And whoever brought her here is likely armed and dangerous." They entered the warehouse, the musty air thick with dust and the lingering sense of long-abandoned industry. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, Sarah heard a faint voice echoing from deeper within the building. "The dragons are coming. The key. We must protect the key." Sarah's heart raced. It was Abigail's voice, but it sounded strained, almost delirious. They moved towards the sound, weaving through rusted machinery and toppled shelves. As they rounded a corner, they saw her. Abigail was huddled in a makeshift tent of tarps and cardboard, rocking back and forth, her eyes wild and unfocused. Surrounding her were dozens of drawings, dragons, portals, and shadowy figures, all rendered in frantic, chaotic strokes. "Abigail," Sarah called softly, holstering her weapon. "It's Detective Chen. You're safe now. We're here to help you." Abigail's head snapped up, her gaze locking onto Sarah. "The shadow people. They're coming. The Dragon King sent them. We have to close the portal." Sarah approached slowly, hands raised to show she wasn't a threat. Abigail, I need you to focus. Can you tell me who brought you here? Before Abigail could respond, a noise from behind startled them. Sarah whirled around to see a tall figure emerge from the shadows, dressed all in black, face obscured by a hood. Step away from her, a cold, familiar voice commanded. Sarah's eyes widened in recognition. Victor Drake. The figure pushed back his hood, revealing the face of Draco Industries CEO. But his smooth corporate demeanor was gone, replaced by a hard, dangerous edge. I'm impressed, Detective, Drake said, his voice like ice. You've come closer to unraveling this than anyone else. But I'm afraid this is where your investigation ends. Mike raised his gun. Drop any weapons and put your hands where we can see them. Drake laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the warehouse. You don't understand what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond a simple murder case. The information Martin Greaves stole. It could topple governments, reshape the global economy. Did you really think we'd let that happen? Sarah's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The offshore accounts, the cash withdrawals. Martin was blackmailing you. But why kill his ex-wife? Insurance, Drake said coldly. We thought she might know something. And as for our friend Abigail here. He gestured towards the cowering woman. Her delusions provided the perfect cover. Who would believe the ramblings of a madwoman? Abigail let out a strangled cry. The Dragon King. He's here to open the portal. Drake's expression twisted into a sneer. You see? A convenient scapegoat and a fascinating case study in manipulating perception. But now it's time to tie up loose ends. He reached into his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, a shot rang out. Drake stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, as Mike lowered his smoking gun. It's over, Drake, Sarah said, moving to handcuff him. We've got your confession, and I'm willing to bet the evidence on Martin's key will be more than enough to bring down your entire operation. As backup swarmed the warehouse and paramedics tended to Abigail, Sarah felt a mix of triumph and sadness. They'd solved the case, but at what cost? Abigail's delusions had been manipulated and exploited. 2 innocent people had lost their lives, and a web of corruption had been unveiled that would likely have far-reaching consequences. Epilogue. Months later, Sarah sat across from Abigail in a quiet room at the psychiatric hospital where she was receiving treatment. The trial of Victor Drake and his co-conspirators had concluded, revealing a staggering network of financial crimes and corporate espionage. Martin Greaves' key had indeed contained information that sent shockwaves through the global financial system. How are you feeling, Abigail? Sarah asked gently. Abigail smiled, a peaceful expression that was a far cry from the frantic, delusional woman Sarah had first encountered. Better. The new medication helps. The dragons, they're quieter now. Sometimes I can barely hear them at all. Sarah nodded encouragingly. That's great progress. I wanted to thank you, Abigail. Without your help, we might never have solved this case. Abigail's brow furrowed. But I didn't do anything. I just told you about the dragons and the shadow people. And in doing so, you gave us the clues we needed, Sarah explained. Your mind interpreted real events in a way that made sense to you. The dragons were the dangerous secrets Martin uncovered. The shadow people were Drake and his associates. The portal was the transfer of illegal funds. You saw the truth, Abigail, even if it was through a different lens. Abigail considered this, a look of wonder crossing her face. So, I helped? I wasn't just crazy. Sarah reached out, squeezing Abigail's hand. You were instrumental. Your unique perspective helped us see things we might have otherwise missed. Never doubt the power of your mind, Abigail, even when it shows you the world differently than others see it. As Sarah left the hospital, she reflected on the case that had challenged everything she thought she knew about perception, reality, and the human mind. In the end, it wasn't just about solving a murder or uncovering a conspiracy. It was about understanding that truth can come in many forms, and that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources. The delusional witness case would stay with her for years to come, a reminder that in the complex tapestry of human experience, every thread, no matter how unusual, has its place and its purpose. The end.
Subscribe for more.